Despite the rigid ways we teach it, science can be a very abstract topic. We learn certain facts about certain sciences, but very rarely do we learn how and why those facts exist. Something I've been curious about for a long time, for example, is how a species is discovered, the process, the rules, and the implications. But that's not a fun YouTube video, so let's reframe the question. What if Bigfoot was real? What would we do? For starters, let's talk about the basics. Bigfoot is a mythological creature with roots in North America, mostly the Pacific Northwest. Bigfoot enthusiasts commonly agree that some cultures also know it as the Yeti or the Sasquatch, depending on the location. The animal is supposedly a 7 to 9 foot tall, hairy man or ape like creature with famously large feet. Folk stories of large, hairy, humanoid forest dwellers have been a part of many native North American cultures since well before written history. But the name Bigfoot can reliably be traced back to a newspaper from Humboldt, California, in the late 1950s. The article reports on a construction crew coming to work one morning to find giant, 16-inch long footprints on their job site and nearby logging roads. After the article was published, more footprints were reported, as well as unusual sounds in the local forests and even in person encounters. The myth grew and grew until 1967, when the famous Patterson-Gimlin film was released, alleging to capture a real-life foot on camera in Northern California. This footage exploded across popular culture and is still recognizable and referenced today just by its shaky graininess and the silhouette of the animal. Not to kill the party, but in 2002, a member of the construction crew that found the footprints in Humboldt, named Ray Wallace, passed away, and his family revealed that he was a notorious prankster and behind the Bigfoot prints.
Ray Wallace died late last year of heart failure at the age of 84. According to one of Wallace's co-workers, Wallace left the giant footprints around construction equipment parked in the woods to frighten vandals. The tactic worked, but maybe just a little too well.
While it's a serious blow to Bigfoot enthusiasts, it hasn't dissuaded them entirely. After all, it doesn't discredit the folklore of the Sasquatch or Yeti originating well before the 1950s, and the Patterson-Gimlin film's authenticity is still hotly debated. But for the purposes of this video, let's say that Bigfoot is real. Someone manages to gather some kind of evidence of an upright, hairy giant in North America, and we can't really call it anything but Bigfoot. What do we need to do next? Well, for starters, we would need even more evidence, and that evidence would have to be more than some grainy film made in 1967. In the era of special effects and deepfakes, video alone wouldn't be good enough confirmation for scientists at all. This article from the Scientific American by science writer and paleozoologist Darren Naish does a great job breaking down what would be considered viable evidence, and what it really comes down to is repeated proof of behaviors that align with what we already know about animals. He lists 4 really important things he'd like to see to be convinced of Bigfoot's existence. Number 1 is vocalizations that are consistent or can all come from the same biological structures. So, in other words, we would need multiple recordings of a sound not already identified, and all of those sounds would need to be able to be made by one animal. So no impossible combinations like squawking and roaring or hissing and barking. Number 2, a skilled tracker or hunter would be able to become familiar with the animal and reliably find its tracks. As Naish puts it, quote, if Bigfoot were real, biologists would be finding and reporting its tracks, at least the same frequency as they do with the tracks of such mammals as wolverines, jaguars, pumas, and ocelots, all of which are extremely rare and even of controversial status within certain parts of the USA. Number 3, those Bigfoot tracks would be more biological. Funny enough, while alleged Bigfoot noises are all over the map, Bigfoot prints are generally all the same. An authentic Bigfoot print would probably have some variation, like how humans can have wrinkles or one weird toe. And when we walk, we splay our toes, and our speed dictates the shape and clarity of our footprint. We'd need to see that in Bigfoot tracks too. Number 4, and probably the kicker here, we'd need Bigfoot DNA. Some people claim to have found it, or something half human, half animal, which, gross. But again, science is about consistency. Animals, even us, don't get to control when and where we leave DNA. No matter how rare, if a Bigfoot passes through an area, it's going to leave evidence. And we should be able to find it and classify it with a bunch of other Bigfoot samples. The pattern in all of this is Bigfoot crossing the line from cryptozoology to straight-up zoology, moving from folklore and first-hand accounts to repeated evidence of an animal we haven't seen before that aligns with science we already understand about animals. So, moving forward, the study of the animal would be treated like straight-up zoology. meaning that rather than proving the thing exists and talking to people who have seen it, the focus would shift to trying to understand and classify it. A quick side note, it turns out scientists don't discover things, they describe them. And that's because, like with Bigfoot, a lot of quote unquote undiscovered animals are just undiscovered by scientists who often don't happen to live in the animal's location. It's more likely that wherever there is an undiscovered animal, local or native people already know about it. So, describe refers more to the new documentation of the animal rather than the discovery of it. Anyways, in order to know what Bigfoot is within the world of science, we need to watch it do its thing: eat, sleep, raise its young, and everything in between. And that brings me back to Naish's second parameter for viable Bigfoot evidence, being able to track it. Hypothetically, we've had a few Bigfoot sightings already. Wherever those are is a great place to start. In those areas, scientists and trackers will set up game cameras in strategic spots, specifically areas with an abundance of plants, prey, and water, as well as the paths of least resistance between those locations. Just like us, animals will take the path of least resistance and the same paths over and over, making a natural trail called a game trail. This strategy of focusing on habitats in areas of high animal activity is called landscape tracking. It's not precise and it doesn't guarantee results, but it narrows down the scope of the search. In these more specific areas identified by landscape tracking, we can start to look for more specific signs of Bigfoot. These would be environmental evidence like fur, disturbances in plant life, gnawing and chewing marks, as well as scratches. Details about these disturbances also give us useful information about the size based on how high up the disturbances go, the distance between claw marks, and the size of the gnaws and chews. In these areas, we can also likely find scat, which can tell us how recently Bigfoot passed by and what it's recently eaten, as well as the famous Bigfoot tracks, giving us information on gait and direction of travel. Now, all of that is great for figuring out the best places to set up cameras and find DNA samples, but it doesn't cover in-person observation. For that, we can look for small-scale signs like fresh tracks or indentations in the ground, disturbances in morning dew, and compressed plants on the ground. Basically, tracks that only stay on the ground for a couple hours. By observing Bigfoot, we can gain a lot of information, like Bigfoot's daily routines, diet, and social hierarchy. But anything related to Bigfoot's internal structure is a more complicated matter, as it would require a really up-close and potentially also internal examination. Fortunately, the ability to do this isn't new to scientists. Take whales, for example. They're hard to observe since they live underwater, so it's challenging to gain information and answer questions we might have. For a long time, scientists thought a group of whales called the Brudas whale complex contained multiple whale species, but they couldn't prove it, so they had to just classify them all as one. Until 2019, when a whale became stranded and died on a beach in the Everglades. Scientists and volunteers were able to get to the whale and collect data, even managing to preserve the skeleton. Because of this completely random event, scientists were able to conclude that the beached whale was different than other whales in the Brudas complex, confirming their hypothesis. So basically, we'd have to cross our fingers that a Bigfoot would pass away in an accessible area where scientists could go and collect data. And with all of this data from observation, the next step would be to classify Bigfoot. Biology has this great thing called the taxonomic classification system, and it divides all living organisms by domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, and genus. Bear with me. We can actually get pretty far in this process with just the information cryptozoology provides us. Domain is easy. Bigfoot is an organism whose cells have a nucleus and organelles because it's not a plant, so it's in the eukarya domain. Kingdom is also easy. Bigfoot is an animal. We can assume that it eats, breathes, moves, and reproduces sexually, so it's Animalia. And we can be fairly certain that Bigfoot has a spine, so he'll go in the chordate phylum. Chordates are then categorized into mammals, fish, birds, reptiles, and amphibians. Bigfoot has hair and is structurally similar to us, so we can call it a mammal, and as a bonus, it's bipedal. And in that same vein, Bigfoot walks like us, on its flat feet rather than on its toes or nails, so it's a plantigrade animal. Next up, the order. But before that, mammals are all divided into 3 categories, and this is where things get sketchier for Bigfoot. These categories are based off how Bigfoot reproduces. If it lays eggs, it would be a monotreme. If it has a pouch to raise its young, it would be a marsupial. And if it gave birth, like us, it would be a placental mammal. And this is where observation becomes so important. We can garner a lot of information from a few short videos, but to classify this mammal properly, we need to see it raising its young, or smallfoots, and ideally giving birth. But considering all the other similarities to us, for the sake of this video, let's call it a placental mammal. But the next two steps of classification are even more complicated because the order determines what Bigfoot is descended from, and the family determines who its immediate cousins are. Now, since they look so much like us at first glance, we may end up classifying them as primates right alongside us. And this has evolutionary implications. When Darwin first founded evolutionary biology, he noted that his work was just a theory and lacked real life evidence. Basically, he had drawn connections between existing species and proposed that they shared a common ancestor and became different as they adapted over long periods of time to survive in specific environments. But at that point in time, we hadn't discovered fossils that were halfway between any two animals. This lack of evidence is commonly referred to as the missing link. Since Darwin's publication, we've discovered a lot of missing link fossils. Archaeopteryx, the fossil that links birds and dinosaurs, is a really cool example, but the most famous missing link fossils all connect to humans. A few include the Java man, Homo erectus, the Heidelberg man, Homo neanderthalensis, and Lucy, Australopithecus. These pieces of evidence aren't without their critiques, though. A lot of anti-evolutionary institutes like Answers in Genesis and the Discovery Institute deny the evidence and call the missing links missing, in an attempt to disprove Darwin's theory in favor of creationism. But you know what would be a lot harder to disprove than a fossil? A living link between us and apes. That's right, Bigfoot. While not many scientists believe in him, those that do, such as Dr. Scott Moody at Ohio University, believe it to be a part of the primate order and the Hominidae family, right along with us. Currently, there are 26 known hominid species that diverged from a common ancestor. Bigfoot could very well be one of them. Top contenders, according to Dr. Moody, would be Homo erectus, Paranthropus boisei, Flores man, and Gigantopithecus blacki. Okay, so Bigfoot is real and our distant relative. Scientists are having a field day, Christian fundamentalists are losing their minds. Most people, however, would have bigger concerns. I mean, how smart is this thing? It's bigger than us, it most likely eats meat. Where is it on the food chain? More importantly, where are we in that food chain? I'd bet the average North American living near a big-footed forest's concerns would boil down to, should I buy a gun? The short answer is boring. Probably not. A common misconception about Bigfoot hunting is that the only way to prove its existence is to bring its giant corpse to a biology lab. But considering how rare a Bigfoot sighting is, it may be an endangered species, and scientists generally wouldn't want to kill it for that and ethical reasons. Not to mention the danger of using a firearm on a human-esque animal. You'd have to be really 200% sure you weren't just aiming at a tall, hairy hiker. And then there's the legalities. It's illegal to kill an animal you don't have a license to hunt that isn't causing harm to yourself or your property. There are also animals that are protected by the Endangered Species Act. Killing one of those, such as a jaguar or a bison, can result in prison time or a fine of up to $50,000. With that being said, every now and then someone reports being attacked by an animal but are unable to identify what it was, and people go missing in forests across North America every year. It's worth re-examining these cases with the context of new information, but if an animal were dangerous enough to warrant taking up arms, we would probably already know of its existence. The bigger question, though, is probably what else is real? North America has a surprising number of cryptid and native mythological animals, from the chupacabra to the flathead lake monster. If Bigfoot has been able to hide from humanity, what else could be able to do the same? The confirmation of Bigfoot's existence would bring up more questions than answers, as it would bridge what is pretty soundly considered a pseudoscience and legitimate biology. It would jumpstart the long and meticulous process of classifying and learning about an undescribed species, and would ripple across multiple sciences and some religious ideologies as well. The general public would no doubt have a field day too. So, do I believe Bigfoot is real? Given the evidence available, no. But I'd love to be proven wrong. For now, this video is just a thought experiment, a fun way to look at the process of describing a new species, but feel free to come back to this video if Bigfoot does turn up.